Well, Paul, thank you very much for coming in and talking about writing. It's something I'm very interested in, very passionate about, and I gather that you are as well. I understand you believe writing is as I do, that writing is a crucial skill that any student, or in fact, anybody in the modern day should be able to master. So if we can kick off, I'd first of all like to ask you, what would you say are your top tips? So you could boil it down to just a few things. What would be your top tips for writing well?
Discipline, clarity, shorter sentences rather than long ones, shorter paragraphs rather than long ones, Anglo-Saxon derived words preferred over Roman Latin derived words, and above all, don't write in such an academic style, which I'm afraid too many academics do, that people like me even have to reach for a dictionary. I mean, really.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're writing only for academic journals, maybe that is okay. But if you're in other forms of life and you're using the master's program to join public service, intelligence community, foreign affairs, defence, whatever, that sort of advice I've just given is absolutely crucial. You must be able to write so people understand.
Sure. Okay, so Paul, when you're writing something, say it be an op-ed for the Australian, or it be the Dibb report, or a communication to a minister, or an academic paper, how do you go about doing it?
I guess I've been at it so long now, it's hard to remember how one. It just comes naturally. You're not old enough to remember the English expression brill cream, which was a sort of cream you put on your hair and it sort of slicked it down. A white cream. My wife reckons that words come out of me like brill cream, in other words. That's not quite true, actually, and I think you find, if you talk to Hugh White as well, it's a labour. It's a labour of love, but it can be very demanding and very frustrating. You mentioned, Charlie, the op-eds. Op-eds are typically 850 to 1,000 words, no more. And even at this stage in my career, when I'm writing an op-ed on a subject I know inside out, like defence policy, I will go through 6 to 8 drafts, and I'm hitting the word check key all the time. Because if I come in at 900, 950 words when they've said 850, the sub-editor on the Australian, in his or her ignorance, I'll cut out my key sentences or phrase. And if it's up to me to make sure that I've delivered within a few words. And so I don't just compose a piece, shorter or longer, and don't revisit it. Obviously, when you're writing, I recently, as you know, co-authored a piece that was about nearly 9,000 words with John Lee. And it was a smooth operation because we decided how we'd divide up the topic on China. He'd do the economics, I'd do the strategy and military. And it folded together seamlessly. But again, you do several drafts. Nobody's clever enough just to write one draft, there it is. Right. I fancy even Shakespeare didn't do that.
That's true. Do you think have you always been a good writer, or was it something that you had to?
Look, again, I say it's back in the Napoleonic Wars. I went to a state grammar school in the days when grammar schools were grammar schools, and they taught you grammar and writing and spelling, and dare one say it, arithmetic and geometry and algebra. And in sixth form, the masters were all honours graduates in their own subjects, and the classes were very small. English literature, I think there was 15 or 20 of us. Geography, there was 6 of us, and that helped because you got personal attention. Later in life, when I joined the public service here, and when I was head of the National Assessment Staff in my 30s, we had in the National Intelligence Committee and the Defence, what is now the Defence Intelligence Organisation, then the Joint Intelligence Organisation, we had editors, because although the work wasn't published, in fact it was, at secret and top secret level, a printed document that went out in numbered copies to ministers, some backbenchers, senior government officials, and because of the Five Eyes Agreement, intelligence agreement, copies went to the United States, Britain, Canada and New Zealand. So we had editors, and the style guide they used was out of the Public Service Commission in those days. When I became director in the late 80s, I junked that, and my edict was very simple. you will follow the writing style guide of The Economist magazine. And I still recommend that to the students who are watching this video.
Yes, I recommend
The Economist, whether you agree with it or not, it might be a bit conservative for some and so on. That's not the issue.
Yeah.
The issue is it's eminently readable. Everything from the headlines and the photographs, but within our context, the style guide is along the lines I've articulated to you, Charlie. You know, don't use ponderous, obtuse words that normal people don't understand and are reaching for dictionaries. Don't write long sentences and keep cutting them up semicolon, semicolon on semicolon.
Absolutely.
And paragraphs are a page long.
Absolutely.
And finally, this applies what I'm about to say more to PhD students, I suppose, but you will tell me about Master's Honours students. My joke, and it is a joke, you understand, about what is a PhD. A PhD is a totally irrelevant piece of research with more footnotes per page than ideas per chapter. And it's the footnotes per page than ideas. Of course you've got to have footnotes. Of course you must be rigorous.
Yes.
But, you know, you're not a bricklayer, as Coral Bell used to say to Desmond Bourne.
Right.
You know, you're not a bricklayer. You know, footnotes are critical to demonstrating you know the literature and you're quoting accurately.
Yes.
You know, not plagiarising. But in the end, the essence is not that. The essence is the style in which you write. And therefore, I recommend to the people who are watching this, get The Economist.
Yes.
And I presume, I haven't checked, you can go online and get their style guide. You used to
You
be
can,
able-
yeah,
you
that's
can?
right. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we should have it.
Absolutely, yeah.
We should hand
putting
it
on
out
the
to-
wattle
we should
side,
hand it out to the
Absolutely,
students.
yeah. Well, that's fantastic. And George Orwell as well, Politics in the English Language. That's another thing I recommended to
Yes.
the students. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic essay.
Yeah.
So, Paul, who are your favourite writers and why, would you say?
Oh, you know, the problem when you've been in this game a long time is that you're sort of bowed down with the professional stuff that you read. And it's very demanding, as you know.
Yeah.
Online, and I'll put emails and all that to one side. I think one has to be choosy. One clearly must read the major strategic studies journals. The books are legion, and therefore you must choose what you're reading, you know. I'm currently reading a book by, I think he's an Oxford professor of French history. And his...
Alistair Horn?
No, a bloke called Toombs, T-O-M-B-S.
Okay, Toombs, yeah.
And his book that's just come out is A History of the English People. It's about 1,000 pages long. My journalist friend, Geoffrey Barker, I bought him a copy and he's racing ahead with it. And again, it doesn't matter what you read, is it well written and is it easy to read?
Yes.
You know, it's not like reading, non-fiction is not like reading a novel in my view.
Yeah.
Novels have got a different skill altogether. You mentioned George Orwell.
Absolutely.
I mean, you know, 1984 Animal Farm, again, not long books.
No.
Disciplined,
Absolutely.
short, you know.
Yeah.
A lot of books these days are the 1,000 pages, you know. And most of us, 300 pages is about right, isn't it?
Yes.
1,000, you know, particularly if you're reading online,
Oh,
you know, the demand on your eyes is high. So I think one has to be Catholic in the sense of widespread in what one reads.
Yes.
As I'm getting older, I read more history, and I know Hugh White does too.
Yes.
I've just been reading a book about the global crisis in the 17th century, when there was religious wars, the 30-year wars between Catholics and Protestants.
Yes.
There was a mini ice age, climate change, when the Thames froze over.
Yes.
And there was economic crises and slumps, you know.
Yes.
I think including the Dutch tulip
Tulip
crisis.
mania,
Yeah.
that's right.
And so, you know, because we do strategic studies doesn't mean to say we shouldn't have a dimension of a history of where we've come from. If you don't know where we've come from, then, you know, you don't know where we are. You've heard me say before that most countries, in my view, are prisoners of their history, their geography and their culture.
Yes.
And you know, my famous example is my old area of study, Russia.
Yes.
You can say it about Australia, in a different way altogether.
Absolutely.
So you put some dimension into it. When you read, I think it should help you to understand that people have gone before you. There's no such thing as or rarely brand new ideas, maybe in the hard sciences, but most of us build upon a legacy.
Yes.
We in this building are currently building on the legacy of Coral Bell,
Yeah.
after which the school is about to be named this evening by our Foreign Minister, Coral Bell School of Asia Pacific Affairs. The myth is that you mentioned the infamous Dibb review, that Paul Dibb, had a clean sheet of paper, and with the help of Richard Bravin Smith, who later became Chief Defence Scientist,
Yes.
and 2 other people, he did it. No, there's a whole bunch of stuff had been written before that I had to read carefully
Yes.
and decide what was relevant and what was perhaps time to move on, a new idea, a new dimension. But rarely do you start with a brand new clean sheet of paper, in my view.
For sure. But well, Paul, thank you very much for speaking to me today and for speaking to the students who are watching this on YouTube. I look forward to seeing you again, presumably at Kyola, and
You will indeed.
SDSC, and the students will see you there and can have another chat about writing or anything else.
And best of
that,
luck
they
to the
fancy.
students in the
Yeah.
master's degree. You'll find it's a great subject to do, but focus on the tough, hard discipline of how to write.
Absolutely. Great advice. Thank you very much, Paul.